Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell, and we are bored of it. And welcome to our Mansions of Madness 2nd edition Buyer's Guide. Maybe you've heard of Mansions of Madness and you're interested in it, but you're worried about the extent of the app integration. Maybe you already own Mansions of Madness and you're wondering which of the many expansions you should get first. Or maybe you just want an overview of all of the expansions and what they come with. Well, fear not, we've got it all covered in our Buyer's Guide.
So, as you might know if you've seen these before, our buyer's guides are generally factual until the end where we give our honest opinion, but mostly we're here to tell you what's what. So we're going to start by telling you what Mansions of Madness is. We're going to then tell you how you can play it, tell you what content is available, what you need to know before buying it, and finally, what we think. And it's important to note that this video was essentially made possible by Asmodee Nordics, as they provided us with all the expansions that you see here, but the base game and the extra dice pack we bought ourselves. So just know that going in.
Before we get deep into the Buyer's Guide, we just want to ask you to please consider subscribing to our channel. The number of subscribers we have means that it's more likely for us to be able to do this kind of content. It makes us more attractive to publishers to work with us and to be able to get this content and to bring you more buyer's guides, more reviews. And we really appreciate every subscriber that we get. We can see in our analytics a lot of our viewers aren't actually subscribed to us. So if you're one of those people, please just hit subscribe and we can continue bringing you more content. Thank you.
Mansions of Madness 1st edition was first released in 2011, published by Fantasy Flight Games and designed by Corey Konieczka. In this, one player would take on the role of the Keeper, a kind of pseudo-DM who ran the scenarios and would control the forces of evil, who played against another 1 to 4 players who each took on the role of a single investigator, who were trying to solve the mystery to defeat the forces of evil. If you've ever played any of Fantasy Flight's other Arkham horror games, then you're pretty much up to speed because it's the same Lovecraftian setting with the same investigators. Now, we're not going to go too much further into the 1st edition because it's out of print and we have not played it. The reason it's out of print is because in 2016, Fantasy Flight Games released a 2nd edition of Mansions of Madness, this one designed by Nikki Valens, based on the design by Corey Konieczka. In this, which is for 1 to 5 players, there is no Keeper anymore. Instead, a companion app takes care of everything the Keeper took care of, meaning that all players will now play as investigators. So you're going to pick your investigators, form a team, then you're going to pick a scenario. The app's going to tell you how to do the basic setup. And then throughout the game, the app's kind of going to randomize events, monsters, items, what you find, what's in a room, the map layout, things like that to make it a bit more replayable. And essentially what you're doing is trying to defeat the forces of evil or maybe solve a mystery before the forces of evil kind of break your body or your mind, or maybe both. Again, like the 1st edition, this is a Lovecraftian game full of cosmic horror, unspeakable evils, and loss of sanity. Although there is an element of humour that kind of runs underneath everything. And in fact, Mansions of Madness 2nd edition is a lot like Scooby-Doo the board game, just with the horror turned up to 11. The scenarios are really varied, and they can kind of run the gambit from all-out monster brawler to literally logic deduction puzzle with no monsters in sight as you try and solve who done did a murder. Now, Mansions of Madness 2nd edition is currently the 53rd best game of all time, as rated by Board Game Geek, which attests to its popularity, especially considering how old this game, or at least this series of games, is.
Mansions of Madness is relatively straightforward to play, which really allows the role-playing and immersion to shine. First, you're going to pick an investigator to play as, which is a character that has a special ability and some different stats for dice checks. Then you'll pick a scenario to play and complete the setup based on what the app tells you. On the table, you're going to have the room tiles on which the miniatures, monsters, and various tokens will be placed, telling you what can be interacted with and where you can go. As you explore more of the map will be uncovered and you'll place more room tiles as the app directs you. The game is played over a series of rounds until time runs out and players fail the scenario or the investigators complete the scenario. The first phase will see each investigator taking a turn on which they can take 2 actions. The majority of the time will be spent moving around, interacting with things in the room, finding new rooms and solving puzzles. To interact with something in a room, you'll click on that token within the app and then it will direct you what to do or inform you about what happens. There are some other actions like attack and evade which come into play when monsters are present, as well as a handful of rare actions which are used situationally, if at all, like setting fire to a room. Once each investigator has taken a turn, the mythos phase will happen, in which bad stuff happens to the investigators, as directed by the app. You'll also often have a variety of item cards which can help you in some way, some negative conditions which will hinder you in some way, as well as mental and physical damage which may or may not lead to ongoing negative conditions. Much of what you'll be doing requires stat checks where you'll roll dice equal to the value that you have for that stat. So if you have a strength of 4 and you're trying to break down a door, you'll roll 4 dice and then enter the number of successes that you get on those dice into the app, and it will tell you if you succeeded or not. Now, obviously, the goal of each scenario will be slightly different, but on the whole, you're trying to uncover what happened by gathering clues and evidence to then use it in the final act to try and stop whatever heinous ritual is about to occur. This might require fighting a boss or deducing which of the many characters that you met along the way is responsible for the situation that you now find yourselves in. Of course, there's the base game, Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. This comes with all of the content that you need to play, such as the room tiles, the cards, the dice, the miniatures, etc. The base game comes with 8 investigators and 4 scenarios. And it also comes with a conversion kit, so the owners of Mansions of Madness 1st edition can incorporate that content into this game, giving more variety for the app to draw on. Now, you do need to have the app in order to play, but it is free to download from a variety of sources, and you can toggle off and on what content you have. So from Mansions of Madness 2, it can be incorporated accordingly. There's also a dice pack that can be purchased to expand your pool of dice in case what comes with the base game isn't enough. Spoiler alert, it isn't. Then there are a whopping 10 expansions available for Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. 3 of these are standalone DLC scenarios which can be paid for in the app and only require the base game to play. These are titled What Lies Within, Altered Fates and Dark Reflections. These are generally recommended to get because they're seen as the most cost-effective way to acquire new and official Mansions of Madness content, and sometimes they can also be found on sale. Do be aware though, you can't transfer these scenarios from one device to another. So if you buy them on your phone and you want to have it on your iPad, then you will have to pay for it again. Then 2 of the expansions are essentially conversion kits for content for the original Mansions of Madness. They're entitled Recurring Nightmares and Suppressed Memories, and for all intents and purposes are now out of print. Recurring Nightmares contains 1 scenario, 8 investigators from the original Mansions of Madness, as well as many of the room tiles and miniatures. Suppressed Memories contains very similar content to the original 2 expansions for Mansions of Madness 1st edition. These are generally not recommended as they're considered kind of worse value for money for all of these expansions. The investigators are considered boring, not very interesting or overpowered, and neither of the scenarios is very highly rated. Because they're now only available on the second-hand market with no plans for reprint, they're only really for the die-hard fans or the completionists. Okay, so there's 5 expansions left. There are 2 small box expansions and 3 big box. These add some new scenarios, investigators, spells, conditions, items, monsters, tiles, and even some new mechanisms. Beyond the Threshold and Sanctum of Twilight are the 2 small box expansions, and add 2 scenarios, 2 investigators, and some small amounts of all of the good stuff just listed. Beyond the Threshold has some good scenarios, but they're more close in style to the scenarios in the original base game, whereas Sanctum pushes the boat out a little bit more, the scenarios a little bit more different and unique, and it comes with some great investigators. However, whilst one of its scenarios is one of the most beloved and considered one of the most highly rated, which is Twilight of Diadem, the other one is considered the hardest and the most unfair out of all of them, which is called Behind Closed Doors. And finally, we have the 3 big box expansions, Streets of Arkham, Horrific Journeys, and The Path of the Serpent. In these 3 big boys, you'll get 3 new scenarios for investigators, as well as a bunch of new cards, monsters, puzzles, and mechanisms. These are some of the best content that Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition has to offer, as they take the scenarios out of the old musty houses and into the wider world. The Streets of Arkham is set in the town of Arkham and has some great scenarios involving gangs, museums, and universities. Horrific Journeys sees you on a train, boats, and zeppelins, and has some of, if not the most, imaginative content out of all of Mansions of Madness. Then The Path of the Serpent will see you in some ancient chambers and the deep dark jungle, similar to a very twisted sort of Indiana Jones style.
What do you need to know? Well, there are a few things actually, but please keep in mind before we get into this that we really enjoy playing Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. Some of the experiences it gives are really unrivaled in the hobby, and we're not trying to be negative, we're just trying to tell you things we think you should know so you can make an informed opinion before you buy it. So the first thing, this is an app-based board game. If you're someone who's not sure about apps in board games, or if you straight out dislike apps being in board games, I don't really know why you're watching this video, but it's not going to be for you. The app is really integrated and it does a lot of heavy lifting, so much so that it is possible to play this with only the app, although it would require a lot of effort from your part to put placeholders in, but people have done it. Then the app is a little bit old and clunky, and it is prone to glitches, so you could have a game ruined, which, to be fair, has only happened to us once out of the many plays we have had, but it's still something to think about. And lastly, the app is functional. It sets out to do what it wants to do, and it does it without fuss. Because the app can randomize the layouts, the events that happen, the monsters that spawn, the items you find, and even the solutions to mysteries, there is replayability thanks to the app. However, one thing we would say is that it's somewhat alluded to that as you buy expansions and content, that the app's going to have more of a wealth to draw from, because how it works is you will tick what expansions you have in the app, and then you would theorize that content will show up in whatever scenario you play. However, we would say it's a little bit of a fallacy in that the expansion content is going to show up far less than you expect it would. Many of the map tiles and mechanisms introduced in the expansions are very specific to a single scenario, meaning that you're not going to see them in other scenarios. And just as an example of the kind of thing we're talking about, you get improvement tokens in the Streets of Arkham expansion. Very simple mechanism, very easy to include in any scenario. Essentially, if you have one of these tokens, that stat that it matches is boosted by 1. Then, if you lose it, you go down to your normal stat again. It could be used anywhere. However, we've barely seen it used since we've had that expansion. We've played a bunch more games, and funnily enough, most of the times we have seen it even mentioned have been lose an improvement token rather than gain one. I think we've only ever gained 2, maybe 3 out of all the plays since getting that expansion. Then you have the map layouts, where each scenario has a number of different map layouts, but these numbers aren't large, and having all the expansion tiles doesn't really increase that variability. Ironically, the scenario that is most variable once you have all the content is supposedly the intro scenario, which is essentially a tutorial, so not something that you want to be replaying again and again. Now, this isn't to say that there isn't replayability, there definitely is. We're just saying that if you buy an expansion and it has some new mechanisms or tiles, don't expect things in other scenarios to be really different next time you play. Also, beware of the length. Many scenarios, you're looking at 2 hours minimum, and a lot of them go much longer than that. And that's not to say it's a negative, just be aware because you're not going to get this out for a quick session. And on the same topic, a lot of people might not like the way the scenarios end, because what Manchester Madness does is a lot of scenarios have a hidden timer that's counting down, and if you don't finish everything in time, you fail. And it can be really obtuse about how long this timer is or how much time you have. Or one thing that it will do that we find a little bit annoying is rather than just call an end to the scenario, it will basically try and smother you to death by just pouring out an insane amount of monsters on the board, and so you get slowly beaten to death and then have the pleasure of managing 6 monsters at once. It's a little bit frustrating. It's also worth mentioning that Manchester Madness is unfriendly to lower player counts. If we're going to play solo or with just 2 of us, we're always including extra investigators. And you can argue that the app increases the amount of time you have if you say you're playing with less investigators, but it just does not balance out at all, because think about it. If you're 4 investigators standing in a lobby, they can all open one room they're next to and investigate something in that room in 1 round. Whereas if you only had 2 investigators in play, it would take at least 3 rounds to do that same amount of room openings and investigations. On top of that, the less investigators you have, the smaller the pool of skills you have, the smaller number of special abilities you have, and probably the smaller number of different items you have when you start the game, let alone pick up along the way. So it just puts you at a general disadvantage as well. Finally, in really positive news, one thing everyone who has this game or is thinking about buying this game should know is there is a fan-made app called Valkyrie, which is where people create their own scenarios for Manchester Madness, and there's a rating system so you can see which ones people like and don't like. You can kind of edit for what expansions you have, and it's such a great resource that I wish more people knew about, because I mean, maybe it's just me, but I didn't know about this until after we put out our review of the game last year and somebody commented. And I've played a few scenarios in there and they were as good of quality as the base game. And it's important because the base game is expensive, and this makes it almost infinitely replayable with no extra kind of expansion buying needed.
Now, we might have seemed like we were a little bit negative on Mansions of Madness from that last section, but we do actually think it's a brilliant time. We just think it's important to know those things before you get invested and potentially get caught out. Mansions of Madness is relatively easy to play and is pretty dynamic in terms of what you'll experience. It really excels at facilitating role-playing and player interaction, so you'll quickly be drawn into its world.
Many of the scenarios are excellently designed, and to be honest, some of the most fun we've had in the hobby has been playing Manchester Madness. The laughter we've had role-playing our characters and putting our own spin on what's happening in the scenarios, doing voices, that kind of thing. You know, the thrill of solving a murder mystery seconds before the airship we're on got sucked into a cosmic void, scribbling pages of notes as you try to decipher which artifact in the museum is cursed. And something that really elevates all this and facilitates the role-playing is this subtle edge of humour that runs beneath a lot of things in Manchester Madness. And I really enjoy that, and it brings a lot of fun and you can play around with it. And it's just really nice to have something like this that you can basically, it's the extent where you can almost teach as you play, but offers you all these experiences. So what do we think? Well, obviously we enjoy the base game, although we've already said our reservations as well, but we're not going to talk about it too much just because we actually have a full review of the base game. So if you really want to know, because obviously that's the core to everything, go check that out. But you should have a pretty good idea from what we've said so far, basically.
Yeah, exactly. For now, we're just going to talk about the kind of other content and what we think. So first up, we definitely recommend getting the extra dice pack if you think this is a game that you're going to be playing a lot, because the base game only comes with 5 dice, right? Which is just not enough. It's pretty painful because everyone's always going to be rolling dice. It's pretty much what you're doing every turn.
Yeah.
So it is pretty painful to have to keep passing them around. It's just a nice quality of life improvement. We'd also recommend getting the DLC, particularly if it's on sale, because we think the scenarios there are pretty fun. And then you've pretty much doubled the scenarios that you get in the base game just from getting the DLC. Yeah,
they're definitely the best value for money that you can get to increase your experience with Mansions of Madness, because they're only a couple of dollars each, even cheaper if they're on sale.
Yeah.
And they don't require any other expansions, so you're already good to go with the base game. So they're quite nice.
Pretty cool.
But I agree with the dice as well. It's probably the most annoying thing I had with the base game, especially. We usually never played with more than 3, I think.
People.
Yeah, and even passing it around, because you have to do these checks in the Mythos phase every turn, and to keep passing dice around, it's just a bit tedious. I can't imagine with 5.
Yeah, it was pretty nice when we had the last time we played with the extra dice. Just bam, bam, bam. Makes it a bit speedier.
Exactly, and it's already a long game.
Yeah. In terms of the other expansions, then we would outright recommend them for their content, but a bit of an issue with Mansions of Madness more generally is the price. So if you really wanted to collect everything, that is going to cost you hundreds and hundreds of dollars. The base game is usually, $100?
Yeah, like 100, maybe a little bit more.
And then each expansion maybe 60 or 70.
For the big 3, and then a bit less for the smaller ones.
So it's going to cost you a lot if you really want everything, and maybe that's kind of okay, but we don't think you really get value for money, because the app isn't, I mean, it's fine, but it's not world class. The minis are okay. The kind of quality of the components is okay. But maybe not for that kind of money, right?
Yeah, I mean, the minis are pretty much universally derided as being a bit crappy, because not necessarily the quality of them, but the fact that they come on these weird little stands that you have to plug them into, and they fall off. And I think we ended up super gluing all ours, actually, because we knew we were going to play the game a lot, especially now we have all this. But yeah, and I mean, going back, you only get 5 dice in a game that all you do is roll dice, right?
Yeah, there's not that much in there. Like, I know you get a lot of minis, but it's not...
Yeah, exactly.
It's not so much substance, let's say, for that kind of price.
Yeah, so it's definitely the biggest issue with Manchester Madness. And I think one of the problems / good things all in one about the expansions is that none of them really shake up the gameplay. They're just more and different scenarios, but it's the kind of game that's what you want. You want the new experiences within the same format with little changes, but you just want to experience more stuff. So that's great because you can get any one of them, that's what you're getting, but then it kind of sucks that you have to pay all this money just to kind of be getting more and more.
Yeah.
And I mean, the base game only comes with 4 scenarios, which isn't great when some of these expansions come with 3.
Yeah.
So basically what we're saying is that is the biggest thing to be aware of before we start talking about these expansions, particularly because we were gifted them, so it's easy for us to recommend them, essentially. But we can tell them what our favourite one is.
Yeah, that's Horrific Journeys.
Yeah. So Horrific Journeys, all 3 scenarios, knock it right out of the park.
Really good.
They're the most interesting, I think, and I think 2 out of the 3 are probably our top 2 favourites that we've played so far, or that we've played.
What I really liked about it is it's tapping more into murder mystery than the horror theme, and I don't know, maybe other people wouldn't like that so much because you go into Mansions of Madness like wanting the horror theme, and I'm not against it, but for me personally, I just think that's a really nice angle to it, and just a fun twist on everything. I think like the different locations where you are being travel, and it's just quite unique, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and the scenarios are really interesting. There's one on a Zeppelin, there's one on a train, and a cruise, and they're all kind of change up your perspective of what you think might happen a little bit. Then when you move to the other 2 big box expansions, Path of the Serpent and the Streets of Arkham, They're on about a level for us. They both have good scenarios. They are, they're a bit of a mix. I wouldn't say any of them are bad. I wouldn't say any of them are as good as Horrific Journeys. This is obviously personal opinion. But you could do either. I think it just depends what you want. Because Path of the Serpent, it takes you out of Arkham into the jungle. It becomes more like horror Indiana Jones. You're going into tombs, you're in the jungle. It's a bit more different than anything else that's kind of come before, except for maybe Horrific Journeys. Whereas Streets of Arkham has some great scenarios, but it's more grounded. It's good that it takes the system kind of outside of mansions.
Yeah.
And you do have some interesting stuff. There was one with gangsters.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
There's the aforementioned one in the museum that I talked about. It's also a little bit more of the same that you got in the base game in terms of the structure and what's going on. So it just depends really what you're looking for with those two, but either one, good option. So then we come down to Beyond the Threshold and Sanctum of Twilight. These are the smaller ones. And we're kind of having these at the back, not because there's anything particularly wrong with them, but just because they offer less. They're less interesting. They're more aligned with the base game. But they're still good scenarios. So I think you might want to weigh it up because the Sanctum of Twilight, it has one scenario that's kind of seen as one of the best and often voted as the best scenario out of all the Mansions of Madness second edition scenarios. But the other one is known for not being very good or not well liked. So you kind of have the balance, whereas with Beyond the Threshold, it is more in the middle. They're both liked well enough, but they're not, I think, winning any awards. So that's something. Do you want the high and the low, or do you want the middle? And the last thing is the Valkyrie app, which is, definitely recommend, even if you have the base game. It's going to give you a lot of replayability. There's a lot of creative things on there. And it's really nice that there's this fan community with Mansions of Madness that you can use to extend your game, even if, it kind of makes it maybe worth it a bit more to splurge on the base game, even if the price is a bit much for you, because then you have this extra content you can just throw in that doesn't cost anything. So that's quite cool. And do you have any final thoughts on everything Mansions of Madness?
Yeah, it's always just a really good time. Obviously, like you said before, maybe part of that is usually when we play, the different people we play with, we're bringing the role-playing vibes and, we're, I guess, lifting it off the board a little bit more, but always a good time to be had. What about you?
Yeah, it's funny because it's probably, it's up there as one of our favourite co-op games, I guess, right?
Yeah.
And we're not so co-op, and usually we aren't enamored so much with, let's say, hard difficulty games where you can just die, if you know what I mean, as you can do in here. But I think because of the story and the role playing, it's much better to not feel like you've failed and rather feel like you've just come to the end of your journey and your character's had a grisly death. Because you've had a lot of fun in the way, so it doesn't matter so much. It's, as cliche as it is, more the experience than having the end. Because usually the end is like a crappy paragraph that's like, and they did some stuff, the end. Right? So it definitely is about the journey here.
Definitely. Unlike for me, Eldritch Horror, which makes me sad every time.
See, I like Eldritch Horror, but I prefer playing it solo.
But this is definitely, the fun is in the journey, whereas that is not always the case with other games.
So that was our buyer's guide for Mansions of Madness, second edition. We really hope it was helpful. Please let us know if it was. Please like, comment. And of course, if you have any Mansions of Madness questions, ask us wherever you see this. And please consider subscribing because it would mean a lot to us. It really helps us grow the channel. But
don't consider it, just do it.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I'm tired of saying please consider it. Yeah. Just do it now.
Subscribe.
Do subscribe. Because it literally, it's what people look at when they look at our channel, if they want to work with us. And it makes videos like this happen because it'll be very tough for us to do a video of this magnitude without help.
Yes.
So please subscribe if you haven't already or if you found this helpful. But thanks so much for watching and we'll see you next time with more buyer's guides and our usual reviews. See ya.
Bye.